I'm the interviewer, and I'm Gil Wright, representing the Fairhope Library, interviewing Christopher Chambers. And Tuesday, 31 August 2021, at the Fairhope Library. Interview is being conducted for the Fairhope Library's Veteran Oral History Collection. So you are Christopher Douglas Chambers.
Correct.
And 1962, you were in Navy for nearly 10 years as a CTI-2.
Right.
And then in the Army and made SFC, Sergeant First Class,
Right.
From 2000 to 2012. So why don't we talk a little bit about your early days of service and
Okay.
how your life maybe influenced that, or vice versa, and how the changes we might have gone through.
Okay. I guess when I was in high school, the recruiters would always come in and all the services would appear, but for some reason, I didn't have ancestors to my knowledge in the Navy, but the Navy seemed more appealing at the time. They had cooler bumper stickers and I guess just a better pitch. You know, the jobs that the Navy offered in high school were more attractive. But I didn't join immediately after high school. I had the chance to go to college. So I graduated from high school in 1980. And I had a really terrible academic year at University of Georgia. It was a lot of fun. That year Herschel won the Heisman and Dominique Wilkins was on the basketball team. And I did terrible in school, but it was a lot of fun. You can read into that as much as you want to, but it was a really poor academic year. But I transferred to a small Young Harris College, a little 2-year college up in North Georgia. And I did really well there. The entire population of Young Harris was about 500, and my biology class at University of Georgia was over 300, so it was a big change. But then I had 2 years of miscellaneous work at retail places, and I kind of had no direction at the time. So this was summer of '85, and one of my good friends was joining the Air Force. He said, "Hey, I'm going down to MEPS. You want to go?" And I said, "Sure, I'm off. I'll go with you." And by the end of the day, he was on medical hold for some kind of blood test issue, and I was standing there giving the pledge, right? So I totally unplanned, and I enlisted in July of '85 on a delayed entry. And I shipped for boot camp. I said, "Hey, can you make it sometime after Christmas?" And they said, "Okay." So they made it 26 December at like 3 a.m. Had to get on the bus.
Right.
That wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but it worked out. So I shipped for Navy Basic on December 26th, and I had tested between sign up and Basic I was going to be an AW, so I was going to be an anti-sub guy. But they gave me the test for the language school, and it was really weird. The DLPT, Defense Language, the DLAB was the aptitude test, so the D-Lab, and I passed. So they said, "Hey, you want a language? You want to go to language school?" I was like, "Sure, sure, why not?" I didn't have any idea what I was getting into. So I didn't score high enough to get a guaranteed language, but after Basic, I went to Monterey, California in the Presidio to language school, and that school was 47 weeks. And then I went to San Angelo, Texas for the tech school, which was 19 weeks. And then actually I did poorly on the final test in Texas, and I got recycled there's only one class every 60 days. So I got recycled 2 months because I was complacent for the final exam to get out of there. But then I went to aircrew school, which was 5 weeks in Pensacola. That's what the NAC is, CTI-2 NAC, Naval Air Crewman. And then went to SEER school in Brunswick, Maine, and I had some leave time, and between leave, I went and visited my roommate who had not yet shipped. Or he had shipped, I went and visited, I can't remember the timing of that, I'd have to write it all down. But then I went home, and I got ready to deploy, and I went to Greece, and I spent 3 years in Athens, Greece with the Naval Security Group activity.
Was that your
Athens, Greece.
language at the defense school?
Right. I took Arabic.
Arabic.
I was an Arabic linguist, and the Naval Security Group activity Athens operated in the Mediterranean. So I had a lot of opportunities there. I got 1,115 flight hours on 2 different aircraft. The P3, it was the EP3E, and then the A3, which usually flew out of Sigonella, Sicily, which was the EA3B. It was carrier capable, but I never did any catch or traps. They had retired it by the time I got there from carrier landings due to a few fatal incidents that had happened the previous year. So all of my A3 time was really out of Sigonella, and I got like 110 hours on the A3 and about 1,000 and, I don't know, 1,005, I guess, to do the math.
P3 sounds like a surveillance aircraft.
Yeah, you're, it's, like, you know, it's known as, there are a couple of variants, and the anti-sub variant, ironically, my first job, the AW, was going to be on the same aircraft, dropping sonobuoys, but this was a different fit. So it had a bunch of electronic intercept stuff on it. But without getting into too much detail, yes, surveillance aircraft. If you remember, I forget what year it was, early 2000s, maybe. There was a plane forced down in Hainan, China. Remember that?
Yes.
Very same aircraft.
Yeah.
It was a different squadron. It was a squadron that flew out of San Diego and deployed overseas, over to the Pacific. But we were on the Atlantic side, did the same thing, same plane. But yeah, it was, you know, signals. It was all signals stuff. And we did signals for the whole 3 years I was there. I ETS'd in November of '90. They were actually shutting down Helenikon Air Base to surrender it to the Greeks because the Greeks wanted it back. There was some negotiation. So a lot of the smaller posts in Greece were being closed, and Helenikon was the big air base, and they closed it, but we retained some rights to land there and do some stuff. And they moved the operation to Rota, so it went to Rota, Spain. And I got out in November of '90. Desert Shield was happening at the time. So I knew I wasn't going to be home long. And in February, 15 of the Arabic linguists who had gotten out recently in the past 2 years were called back up. So they called us up, sent us to New Orleans for Desert Storm, and we got ill-fitting uniforms issued at Desert Storm because there was nothing left in the supply shop, and sent us full of duffel bag of useless gear that we mostly didn't need. And we went to Rota and did basically the same job at Rota for about 6 weeks. It was really quick, easy war for us because we went to Rota and we worked in a skiff during the day and went and drank beer at night. And when they told us we were done, they shipped us to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and we got out in 1 day. So demob was 1 night in the hotel. And they gave us a 214 and sent us home.
Well, it sounds like Greece and Rota were fabulous off-duty locations.
Yeah. For a long time, Greece was considered a hardship tour, which was strange because when we got there, it was absolutely amazing. History galore. The beaches were great. Being overseas was a little spooky at first when you sat down. You know, you don't know what to expect. When I'd never been outside of the country, so when I got to Greece, my roommate that had been my roommate in Monterey had gotten an apartment. I'd sent him a power of attorney, so we already had lodging, but I had to do some check-in stuff for a couple of weeks at the contract hotel before I could go to the apartment. But we were on the economy. There was no on-base housing to speak of, so they put us all out on the economy. So we were out in town. They gave us per diem for housing.
And unlike most military, you had the language. So
Well,
you-
I
you're the
didn't
center
have
of the
Greek,
group?
but we were.
Well, that's right. You were Arabic.
Yeah, but one of the things is weird things about languages is I took French in high school. Once that key is turned in your brain, other languages seem easier to pick up. So it was easier for people in the language field to go and take a Head Start Greek course
Right.
and pick it up quickly than people who had not had that key turned, right? So it's an odd, I guess, a feature of the mind that once you learn the tricks of a foreign language, the next language becomes easier. And a lot of the guys were really, really good, and they picked up languages. If they went to Germany, they could pick up German in a couple of, like, 6 weeks.
Wow.
And they could go out on town. So once that wire is tripped, you can pick it up really quickly, which was surprising.
I kind of expected that for the Romance languages, and I remember going from Germany to France to Spain, and
Right.
that kind of happened in a small way. But with the Arabic being tremendously different.
Well, the languages were completely different. If you're not in a language field, you don't really think about like difficulty levels of languages. I mean, some of them you might, but for example, the Romance languages, I think Italian, French, and Spanish were level 2, right? So they're the easiest. They have the same alphabet by and large. There's a few characters that are different, but so level 2 is an easy move. Some of the Oriental languages are level 3. Russian was considered a 3. Persian Farsi was at the time considered a 3. I don't know if they've changed it. This is all old information from the 80s, so I don't know if they've changed the ratings. But Arabic was a 4. Chinese was a 4. Some of the tonals, which are the Oriental languages, where you're the same word using a different tone, or kind of the sing-song languages, and there's a lot of them over there. Those are 4s because that is very unlike speaking English, right? Inflection is one thing, but the tonals have a whole different structure.
So on your on the job, you were in a P3 Orion, which is a 4-engine turboprop, right?
Right,
And
right.
probably went for 4 or 5 hours at a time.
The normal flight was 8 to 10, and it could go as long as 13. And it was cold, right? I mean, you're up, 25,000 feet, maybe higher, and it's freezing. I mean, you're at the top of Mount Everest.
Right.
And the equipment was hot, so they kept the plane cold. And man, it was cold.
So you scoot over towards the electronics to warm up?
Well, you end up, you buy electric socks, battery operated socks.
Okay.
You're wearing, even in the middle of summer, you go to the brief in the morning, you got your long johns on and your boots, and maybe another layer of sweatpants, and then your flight suit. So it's pretty hot on the ground when it's summer, but by the time you're at altitude, it's pretty doggone cold, and you're glad you're warm. And then when you come down, you can feel it heating up again, but by that time you've turned all the equipment off, and it cools down pretty quickly with no equipment. So you get back to ground level. It's comfortable for a little while, but you're wearing a lot of gear,
Right.
because you're going to the extremes. So there's a well, the bottom half of the plane, like it's a big cigar, and you're build the floor in the center. So the passenger area is temperature controlled, and the bottom half of that cigar below the floor is ambient temperature outside. It's really cold. So if you want to freeze something, you just drop it in the bottom and it freezes.
Wow.
And there's some convenient things, which I will not get into right now.
So this, you got out and you must have been in the Ready Reserve and were called back for Desert Storm.
Right. So part of my 8 years, I signed up in December of '85, ETS'd on Christmas Day of 90, and then I was 3 years in the IRR at the time. So I was a real easy call up because I just gotten out. So the 15 of us who got called up from the IRR supposedly were the first 15 that had been called up since World War II, which was kind of unusual. We didn't think about it, but they told us that, so I assumed that was correct. But I ended up re-enlisting later on to stay on in the reserve because it was such easy money. One weekend you get $250 or something, and you just do 2 days, and it was easy. So I did that and ended up getting out because they shut my unit down. At the time I had Tanya, I had met her and gotten married. We were living in Indianapolis, so I had joined the local reserve unit, which was the Naval Security Group Detachment, Indianapolis, as the reserve center. It was the Naval Armory on the White River. So they had water, but you're in the middle of Indiana. You really didn't have any communist horde to defend against in the center of Indiana, but they transferred during part of the BRAC realignment in the early 90s is they shut down that security group and transferred it to Fort Sheridan. And they gave us the option. Fort Sheridan was not practical. The commute was not currently budgeted. So that happened in the early summer, late spring, early summer of 94. And they gave us the option to get out or to transfer to Fort Sheridan. But that meant that until they budgeted it in the next fiscal year, you had to pay your own way and you had to pay your own lodging. And lodging in Chicago was
tough.
$200 or $300 a night.
Yeah.
And that was all we made in a weekend, so we couldn't afford to even go. Right. So they lost, 2/3 of the unit just when that happened.
Cost of housing.
Yeah, well, junior enlisted guy,
right?
You're not making much. Right. It was good fun money, but one night in Chicago, if you're lodging, it's over. You spent your whole weekend. So we got out, and I was out for a good long time until 2000 when my wife berated me for almost letting a easy retirement get away.
Right. You didn't have a military family background, but did your expectations of going in the military, or did it make you suddenly more disciplined or shift your brain set any?
Well, my dad was a draftee for about 15 months. When did he go in? 46. So he was born in 28. So he served a year. He really didn't like it. He was drafted. He was a clerk, like a clerk typist. So he had his year. My mom's grandfather was a career Army guy. He was World War I and World War II and post-occupation Japan, and then he retired. Her older brother, Austin, he was Navy, but I didn't ever know him. He died in a test flight, F-4 Phantom test flight at Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia, Portsmouth. So there was a history, but I was, when that was an active element, I was too young to know it. But when I finally decided to enlist, I was older. And so when I got to boot camp, I was 23. I was one of the oldest people in the company.
Probably called you professor.
Well, yeah, I mean, they try to get people right out of high school. So we had 80 people in the company, and one guy was 34. So he was grandpa to most of the people. He was old enough to be some of those guys' dad. But there were two guys younger than him, but older than me, and I was the fourth oldest guy. There were a bunch of Filipinos who were there because the Philippines, and there might have been a couple other countries, but we had a lot of Filipinos in our company and they were all like in the early 20s. but Filipinos were allowed to join without being citizens if they got, and they could re-enlist after that tour because they were allowed to get their citizenship during that first tour. So if they managed to get that during their first 8-year contract, they could re-enlist as a U.S. citizen. So a lot of Filipinos, company commander was a Filipino. I mean, we had Subic Bay and a lot of presence in the Philippines at the time.
Right.
So they were older, but not as old as I was. So part of it in basic was being older. I didn't really have a problem with the discipline piece. I knew that was coming. I could take instruction from my recruiter to learn the 11 general orders. I didn't have a weight problem. I barely made the minimum weight. My little brother, Curtis, he was born mentally handicapped and he died in '84. So I spent the year before I went to basic pretty depressed and without direction. And I basically just smoked cigarettes and drank soda. So I lost a lot of weight. When I shipped for boot camp, I was 8 pounds above the minimum. So I was really skinny. I mean, that was 100 pounds ago when I shipped, but it was in 1985. So, so physical fitness wasn't a problem. It was easy. The discipline part was easy to me because I was older and I'd already done a bunch of stuff and had a work ethic. And I could do simple things like fold my t-shirt the right width to fit on the shelf.
Right.
It was just silly stuff that became easy. And some of the guys really struggled with even the basic stuff. It was kind of strange.
Did your high school preparation helped you into college and probably helped you there as well?
Yeah, I mean, the educational part did. I really didn't have too much exposure to Navy stuff. It's just on career day when the Navy guys would come in, I would always chat with them. And it was something that was always kind of on the back burner. But when I decided what branch, the Navy was always the foremost option.
When you would come home on holiday with the family, were they receptive and welcoming you back, or
yeah,
no tension there?
No real tension. My little brother died in '84, so when he died, I became the baby of the family, right? So I had 3 older sisters and an older brother, and they had all gone off and done their life and moved out of the house, gotten married, started having kids. So I was kind of the adventurer of the group. We grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, so they all moved out of the family house, and wherever they ended up landing was somewhere in the metro Atlanta area. So whenever I came home, if we could arrange it, it kind of turned into a family reunion. So that was kind of fun. I had stories to tell. They hadn't left town really, so they had stories, but they were all local stuff. Right. And I don't want to diminish the importance of their personal story, but they didn't go anywhere, and my stuff felt exotic to them because I was overseas and they were in the same town. And it's, I guess, like that with high school people. There's a handful of people who never leave town and other people take off, so the stories are just different and feel more exciting and adventurous if you've left. Yeah.
Well, after several years in Greece, coming home, then you possibly appreciated things from home in a different way.
Yeah.
Round of the land of the round doorknobs. You ever heard that one?
Yeah. European plumbing, bidets,
Yeah.
weird toilets, the rules, like the food was awesome, the scenery was awesome. The history over there to me was amazing because everywhere you go, there's 2,000-year-old ruins.
Right.
Everywhere, it's all over the place. No matter where you went in the Mediterranean, the ruins were 10 times older than America. But the locals were not interested because it was just another pile of rocks. They had grown up there, and it was boring, and they didn't care about it really. They could point you to, Sunyon or the Acropolis. I mean, the first weekend I was in Greece, I was in the contract hotel, the Apollon Palace, which is right up the street. It was, like a 3-mile bus ride maybe. And I don't remember her name, but a very generous lady who was a warrant officer's wife was in the hotel. And me and a couple other junior enlisted guys who were basically busted, right? We were penniless. I kept myself penniless during my check-in because there was a little tiny casino inside the hotel lobby. And I spent every nickel I had in this damn casino. Easy to drop some coins in there and pull the handle, and you win enough to do it again until you have nothing left. So typical casino odds. But one morning during breakfast, she offered to take me and a couple other guys on a tour, and she would pay for it. And we went to see the Acropolis. And your whole life in history books, you see this building and you read the history, and it's very far away and long ago, and you'll never see it. And there we are, right in front of this thing. And it was incredible. You weren't allowed to even take a pebble. You were supposed to check your shoes to make sure none of the rocks at the Acropolis were stuck in your shoe tread, because people would take souvenirs, and there's millions of people a year, and pretty soon the entire hillside would be stripped of every pebble as a souvenir from the Acropolis. So they're very strict on that. But the tour guide was pretty good. His English was good. He was a native Greek. And Greece and Turkey have never gotten along. So every time he talked about the Turks, firing cannons at the Acropolis, he would say the phrase, "Our friends, the barbarian Turks." He didn't like them much at all. But it was really cool to go see the history in a country that you had read about your whole academic life, and suddenly there it is. And that stuff was all over the place, amphitheaters over in Sicily, and going to Santorini to see the Minoan ruins and Red and Black Beach, and you look out into the water and you can see the basin of an ancient volcano that was so huge it left 5 islands there. It's amazing to travel and learn the history of the world and geography. You kind of have to learn that stuff just because you're seeing it. And if you want to understand what you're looking at, you need to kind of realize what you're seeing. So that part was really cool. That's probably my favorite part of being in the military, is traveling all over the place and seeing strange and exotic things that you could never do on your own dime.
Well, after Desert Storm, then you showed up in the Army.
Yeah, we did Desert Storm. I got back a year or two later. My wife said, "Yeah, I can go back in the reserve. You still got some time in, right? Just sign up." And it was easy, right? Transitioning from the IRR to the reserve was just a couple of sheets of paper.
And they didn't care that it was Navy or Marines or Army.
Well, so I got back and did at the Naval Armory in Indianapolis. It was at 38th and White River. So anybody that knows the town, it's an obvious big white building right on the water.
Okay.
And I was in that unit from sometime in 92 until summer of 94, when they shut that command down. And then I was supposed to stay in until 96, I think. I can't remember exactly. But I got out, and I had a break-in service from 94 until 2000. And then my wife browbeat me again and said, "Look, you've already got 8 years in. Why don't you just sign up? Just check it out. Go talk to them," which I did. And I talked to the Navy first because it would be an obvious come back in the service, but they wanted to bust me down to E3. And I was like, "I've done E3. I'm not doing E3 again. Are you nuts? I've gotten my degree. I'd gotten my bachelor's degree at Indiana University." So I talked to the Army, and they said, "Well, you got your degree. You can keep your rank." I said, "Sweet, let's do it." So my wife knew a CW4 who was the admin chief at a local reserve unit. So when I talked to my recruiter, I gave him the UIC for that reserve unit, and he signed me up, and I went and did the nightmare that MEPS is, trying to get in with all the bureaucratic BS that's involved in dealing with a bunch of bureaucrats and government hacks getting in and signing your name just right on your urine sample, and it's just like, oh, come on. But it was easy, and I showed up in my first 2 months. My weekend drills at that unit, I was in civvies because the uniform issue process was kind of the more bureaucracy, getting the right paperwork from the supply guy and all that stuff. So it was easy. You know, transitioning into the Army, I didn't really know anything about even wearing the uniform properly, but you pick it up quick. And when I came back in, I came in as a linguist. So I had to kind of change my mentality from a cryptologic technician interpretive. That's what it was in the Navy. They called them billets, right? So I was in a Navy billet for an intelligence guy, and it turned into, I don't know if it was 98 Gulf at that time. It might have been a different number, but it was a 98 Gulf. So I was a 98 Gulf. I was doing Arabic linguist stuff in a local battalion headquarters, or brigade headquarters, which was a little strange. And my job there was to study Arabic. So I just went there and studied Arabic. And eventually they asked me to help do some local admin stuff because I was good at it. You know, I got my degree in business management, so I could do all the typing and, you know, Microsoft Office stuff and manipulating orders and all that. So the transition into the admin piece was easy. And I quickly got certified as a 42 Alpha, which I think it's changed MOS too. I can't remember what that one is either, but I think it was a 71 Lima at the time. Now it's 42 Alpha. But so I became an admin guy, but later I got called up for OIF as a linguist because I was still on the roster.
I forget what OIF is.
Iraqi Freedom.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 2003, I ended up going to Baghdad. And I spent 14 and a half months on that deployment. So I did 2 wars. First one was easy, almost not a war. It was a vacation in Spain almost, but OIF was a challenge.
Well, if I had gone, it had been in helicopters, but I always imagined it would be more dangerous to be in a truck with IEDs getting someplace. Because you wouldn't be prepared. And
yeah, I got called up pretty early, so I got my MOB orders in February of 2003 to report to Fort Bragg, and it took 6 weeks at Bragg for our unit. It was an intel unit, right? I've been transferred on paper to a unit, ironically, in Fort Sheridan, Chicago. Fort Sheridan, Illinois, but it was basically Metro Chicago. So I was an Arabic linguist in an intel unit, which is exactly what I had gotten out of back in 2000 or 94, gotten out in 94. But it was mostly Arabic linguists. There was, we had a 54 Bravo, which was the chemical guy, right? The CBRD guy. He was our chem suit and mask supply guy.
okay.
Because, you know, they had weapons of mass destruction. That's what they told us.
That's what they told you.
And we all had to carry this damn chem suit around all the time with a mask, and it was very clumsy. This whole separate bag with chem suit stuff in it. This big charcoal suit and the boots and the gloves and all this crap, and you had to keep it with you at all times because anytime the siren went off, you had to put your chem suit on. Put your mask on first, and then you're fumbling around with this big clumsy suit.
So any mortar or rocket could have had chemical warhead.
Theoretically, yes. So we did 6 weeks at Bragg. On the 20th of March, 2003, we took off and we left Pope, which was Pope Air Force Base adjacent to Bragg, Gander, Newfoundland, Shannon, Ireland, Aviano, Italy, Nicosia, Cyprus, and then Camp Wolf in Kuwait, which was just a bunch of Air Force pallets in the middle of the desert. We didn't know where the hell we were. We landed at an airfield, And I was one of the 5 people. The plane was absolutely crammed with people. And we all had 2 duffel bags in the belly, but all the other gear was with you. Your mask, your chem suit. I'd done combat lifesaver, so I had my lifesaver kit on my waist. We had our weapons, so they let us take our weapons on the plane. And we were crammed in. Every seat was full. Your floorboard was completely full of gear. We were all sitting there with our feet up in our chair trying to get some sleep on this, 27-hour flight or something. It was a nightmare. But we landed, and I was one of 5 people that got the duty to unload the belly with all these damn duffel bags. So everybody else is over here waiting, and we're unloading bags, and the air raid siren goes off. So you got to put your chem suit on. It's 125 degrees on the tarmac.
Before you put on the chem suit.
Soaking wet. But that became so common that once we got into our housing area, which was a big warehouse, a block long, and each side had 8 different company level areas, right? So you got 8 company level areas on this side of the warehouse, and cinder block walls dividing them, and 8 more on the other side. And the cinder block all went up about 10 feet. So in the morning when the alarm clocks started going off at 4:30, you could hear it there was, I don't know, over 1,000 people in this building, probably more than that, and clocks going off everywhere. It was crazy. And the girls' area actually had barbed wire around the top of the cinder block. So for whatever reason, they think people are going to be climbing this cinder block, and maybe they would. But we ended up having so many missile attack warnings that we ended up sleeping in our chem suit, and our mask was hanging here. So we had our PT gear on, and you put your chemical suit on, and you're just sleeping, waiting for the thing. And there were 2 nights in a row where it went off 4 or 5 times. It was misery.
Just roll against the wall and pull your mattress over yourself and go back to sleep?
We had bunkers. There were bunkers lined up in the street between the warehouses. So you hear the siren, you wake up and you jump out of bed and you grab your mask, and we actually had our tops weren't on us, but your boots were on sometimes. After it happened so many times, you left your damn boots on. But you rolled out, you put your stuff on, and you're running across the street trying to get everything else on, right? So there's these big concrete, sewer conduit thing.
Yeah.
What do you call them? It's like an underpass.
Right.
Like you build a road over it. Just these big pre-built concrete structures that they drop. Yeah. And there's sand, and you're going in there trying to get your boots on, and sand is flying, and you're full of sand and all your stuff. But you just sit there, and you're so crammed in on both sides. You're all sitting there in this concrete thing, trying to cram in. And even when the thing's going off, the siren's going off, more people are trying to cram in and get their gear on. It was just, you do the best you can. And that happened a lot for 2 days. People in my unit ended up going out to Camp Udari, and we had the same thing out there a couple of times. It is now called Camp Beering, but it was one of the 5 desert camps that were nothing but a big chunk of desert surrounded by berms. It was like 1.5 miles on each side. So you're inside this big square of desert. It might be bigger than that, I don't remember. But at the top of the berms were watchtowers, and inside the berm area were all these different units spread out all over the place. And there were some central areas, chow hall, the mayor's cell, the guy that ran the camp. I think it was usually a lieutenant colonel or a colonel who ran the entire camp. And you had to have some major sign off before you could leave the camp. So you're really a prisoner in this camp out in the middle of the desert. But you had all the food and water you could possibly want. They had a gym. It's funny, the gym was in a tent, and they had a bunch of workout gear, but a storm blew the tent away. So eventually it was just a bunch of workout gear sitting out in the open in the sun. But there was so little to do if you weren't working and you were off and you wanted to find something to do. There were people, hundreds of people, working out on this makeshift exercise area that were a bunch of Air Force pallets hooked together to form a flat surface with benches and barbells and just something to do, right? And a lot of times you're out there wearing goggles and a bandana over your face because the dust is blowing all over the place, and you're sitting there pumping iron, you know. Something to do.
Yeah.
You're out in the dirt.
Was there an airfield or a heliport at each one of these?
There was accessibility. Some of them were outside the berm. They did, at Camp Udari, they did, I think, on the very far edge, I can't remember what direction it was in, but there was a helipad inside. And as a matter of fact, when we went to Baghdad, we went to Udari from Camp Doha, which was adjacent to Kuwait City. And you have to convoy back out to the camp. And we left the security of Kuwait and went to Baghdad in June of '03, and we went on Chinooks. So we went to Udari and spent the night there, and the next morning, 2 Chinooks took our unit up to Baghdad. So we spent the rest of it was like almost 10 months, I think, in Baghdad from summer of '03 until February of '04. 8 months, should have been 8 months, I guess.
Well, those large tandem helicopters are what were used yesterday to take out the last people. Were there tanks at your little base, and were you expecting to shoot from there, or is that a staging area?
Udari was, it was a staging area. You know, when the war had first started, the plan, when it was going to be executed, so this was Colin Powell doing the WMD, and they had decided, I think it was still Colin Powell, right? He was now,
I think so.
SecDef. He was a general during Desert Storm.
Okay.
And he was like, we're going to cut it off and kill it, right? That was Desert Storm. And now he was the one at the UN saying they have WMD there. So our unit actually, most of us got attached to a unit that was part of the WMD search. But when we were leaving Camp Doha, we were in 2 Chinooks. It was miserable hot. It was hot as hell in there. The Chinooks stayed open, right? They can fit a lot of people. You can get 30 people in there. It's packed. But the doors were open because they had gunners on each side. And the hot jet exhaust was blowing through. So the first, say, 15 minutes was really cool and exciting because you're in a chopper and you're flying in formation. You're like, wow, this is cool. But after 15 minutes, you're kind of done with it and you're sucking in all this hot air. And it was just, after a while, it's so hot in there with all that exhaust blowing through the cabin that you almost became, disoriented. Everybody was suffering from a heat injury almost by the time we landed because it was just blowing through we're glad to get off of those things. And we landed at Baghdad International Airport in a corner where our unit was going to be picked up by forward elements that had already gone up to, pick out our housing. So the trip was miserable. The first few minutes were cool, but the trip was miserable. And the first couple of weeks up there was miserable, but eventually you come up with a daily routine. And you just start ticking off the days, right? Just start marking like Castaway. Make a mark on the cave wall, waiting for yourself to get deployed out.
Well, did they ever find any weapons of mass destruction?
I'm going to say yes, because we were on the teams that went out to do collection. We were in a group. Most of us ended up in a command called the Combined Media Processing Center Baghdad. And we found a lot of evidence. And at the time, General Keith Dayton, he was a 2-star, he was the guy who was leading the search. He was on, the camp we ended up on was Camp Slayer. Third ID had established, Third ID was the group who went through Baghdad. Remember Baghdad Bob saying, "There's no tanks here," and the tanks were rolling right behind him on video, right? So that was the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart. They established Camp Slayer. They named it Camp Slayer. You gotta have some badass camp name, right? So we were at Camp Slayer, and the Combined Media Processing Center was on, they all had big lakes there. It was a big canal system, but our building was right on the lake, and we would go out and capture documents and sometimes personal effects from people who'd been arrested. Some people in our team knocked a wall out of a garage and found like $20 million cash US. So you have to handle all this media of different types. Computers, address books, government documents. We collected all that. And we did what we called triage, which was give it a first look and see if it's important. And then you would turn your summary over to an intel analyst, and they would rate it low, medium, or high. And if it was high, it would get an immediate translation. And the other stuff would go into a box, and it would go to Defense Intelligence Agency, and it would get translated later. So we did a lot of that, and we thought we found a lot of good evidence of WMD. But I forget the guy's name who started that, but the report that came out was the Doeffler report, and it said no WMD. And we were shocked. What we presented, we thought was pretty solid. And what they turned in the report was, to us, a stunning, basically a betrayal of the entire mission. Like, there's nothing here. I still strongly disagree with people who say there's no WMD, because we had booby traps with sarin gas. There was all sorts of evidence of mortar heads and all things in these warehouses at these different facilities that we found. But we were at a ground level, and whoever was doing the report was at, a higher level and had more information. So it's hard to argue when you don't have the same amount of data. So right. What we saw convinced us there were WMD, but they said no.
Well, you went on to be a sergeant first class, so was that years later or during that process?
I was deployed. I was in E5 the whole time I was deployed. I actually had to start my leadership training over when I joined the Army, so I went backwards. I kept my rank, but I had to go back and do a bunch of really basic Army stuff. And it took a long time to get it accomplished. I didn't finish the leadership schools until 2006. So I had gone to Iraq, I'd come back, I had signed up for PLDC, which is now called Warrior Leader Course. And the first time I went, it was at Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Camp Shelby. So Katrina came through, my wife was here, and I was there, and we both got hit by Hurricane Katrina. They shut down the school, and I had to go back the next year. So in spring of '06, I finished WLC, or PLDC, and I did all 3 iterations of BNOC for the 42 Alpha, the admin stuff, up at Fort McCoy. And then I got on with Army Casualty in Virginia at HRC, and I've been doing that ever since. I did it in uniform. I made E6 the summer of all my PLDCs, and I got to Virginia, and I made E7 while I was in Virginia in uniform. And my orders ended. I finished 9.5 months of MOB in Virginia, and then I was on COADOS, which is contingency operation active duty for operational support. So I had 3 years of that. So I had 30, 40, right at 44 months of active duty time in Virginia. And that ended all of my possible MOB time for the War on Terror. And conveniently, when that time ended, they needed to hire civilians. So I was hired in the same slot. And shortly after that, moved from Virginia to Fort Knox because the next round of BRAC consolidated a bunch of human resource functions at the new Human Resource Command Center at Fort Knox. And I've been there ever since.
And BRAC was that process of reducing the numbers of bases?
Yeah, base realignment and closure. I think there have been, since Clinton was in, they did BRAC 1, and it shut down some bases. Fort Ben Harrison was in BRAC 1, which is where my wife lived, and she saw the base that she basically grew up on turned into some condos and a small reserve center and a hospital. But yeah, 2 and 3 later followed, and they're big and dramatic and very expensive to implement, so they haven't done another round. We've shrunk a lot, even though you wouldn't know it. Reagan wanted a 600 ship Navy. We got very close. We had 588 or something Navy vessels. Now we're down to 300.
Tremendous change.
It is big.
We are still involved with the mortuary business, right?
Yeah, I'm actually, I'm still up in Army Casualty Operations. There's a lot of different elements of it. I'm in the notification section, so we get the very first indication there's a new case. And we don't just do deceased, we do wounded and ill as well. So if we had other service members, we do Army only unless we're asked for assistance. But if there were other soldiers involved, like in the bombing incident that just occurred that killed 13 service members, one of our soldiers was killed. It's mostly Marines, but one of our soldiers was killed. So our team contacted a local casualty office and arranged, it might have been more than one, but arranged for notification to the next of kin with an in-person team going to the house. But all the wounded and ill cases are done by phone, and we do that personally. I get a case for somebody who has a traumatic amputation from an IED, they lose both arms or lose a leg or take a gunshot. Then we get the report, we pull the paperwork, and we figure out who we need to notify, and we call family from that office. So it's tough. Some of those are tough. During the surge in the late 2000s, 2007, 8, when we were in Virginia and getting all that stuff from the surge and the Battle of Fallujah and all this stuff, there were some really terrible incidents, and we stayed super busy. But the office has shrunken in size. We had 36 people just doing notification on, it's a 24-hour center. So 24 hours a day, you're doing notification. You can't do the notification itself during that whole 24-hour block, but you got a lot to do during that period.
In the news, it made it sound as if some of the notifications were 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. That didn't sound right.
It can be, but that's rare, right? It used to be that you could start at 06 and run until 2200. They expanded the window because we had so many instances where people had left for work in the morning and you try to catch them. Now we can go 05 to midnight. There are some cases, and this is not ideal, but if you have notified a wife at 2300 and you get to the parent's house at 12:15, right? So it's dark, it's after midnight, but the wife has been told. If you're the parents, do you want to be told, or you want to have the team wait till morning? So as horrible as it is, we usually notify the parents or whoever the other parties. Sometimes you can't find the wife, right? So you might notify the parents first. If you go to the address on the paperwork and it's a vacant house, or it's a business, or it's an apartment complex with a locked gate, or you get there and it's, a laundromat, like what's wrong, right? We can't we don't have any additional information to go on, so you would notify the parents and say, hey, look, we're looking for Judy. We tried this address and it didn't work. Do you have her address? We would like to notify her in person. And sometimes they'll give you the address, sometimes they'll just pick up the phone. We would prefer that we do it, but you can't control what people do, especially when they receive that kind of news. It's out of your control.
Do you get any training on grief counseling?
There are separate elements that actually do that in depth. In a perfect world, we would never speak to the next of kin of a deceased service member. That's all handled locally, because as soon as the notification happens, the family gets a casualty assistance officer assigned. And that is their person to ask questions of. And there are a lot of other elements involved in the process after the initial notification, benefits and this movement to Dover, right? So there's this whole Dover piece. If family members want to go to Dover, we don't call it a ceremony. It's not a ceremony. It is a transfer. But I mean, it's done in battle dress uniform, right? It's not a Class A thing. It is a process of moving the remains from the plane to the mortuary facility. So it's not a ceremony. People view it as a ceremony, but people want to go to it, so the family members are allowed to go there in limited number. And we facilitate that as one of the many pieces that happens after initial notification. There's benefits, there's long-term benefits. They do things like the actual funeral service, the unit memorial, and then long-term follow-up that happens. And they have people that do the grief counseling at various stages throughout that whole process.
It's an important job. Do you have any other reflections about how all of this has affected you and where you're going with it?
Well, I'm a member of the Legion, so I like being around other members of different services. My wife and I, you've been in. There's a brotherhood that no matter what service you were in, you might have some of the inner service stuff. You see the fist fights in the bars in old World War II movies, but when someone attacks the military or says military people are stupid, or then all of a sudden you're all one unit, right? You're all together in that. And it's hard to even watch the news right now. It's so frustrating. When Afghanistan collapsed, we immediately started getting emails, and you probably got them too, from the VA, from the DOD, right, maybe from the local. Don't kill yourself. If you need counseling, you're like, what the hell do you think I'm gonna do? I mean, this is not, I didn't screw up 20 years of blood and treasure sacrifice. This is the current administration's act, sheer stupidity. I couldn't believe it. So I think we're in a very dangerous time right now. I hope they can right the ship, but I don't know. Because I'm still a federal employee, I'm very limited in what I can say and what actions I can take. But there are things that I want to be able to do when I retire in 40 months, because this is a tough time for military. A lot of people are going to be very frustrated. I think this is going to damage recruiting terribly. I think accountability for the debacle that just happened needs to occur, and so far they haven't heard any accountability happening, which is frustrating. And if we can get our voting system to work properly, which it, in my opinion, did not last year, maybe we can fix it. But I'm proud to have served. I got to do a lot of amazing things that the government paid for that I would never been able to do. Got to go see the Hanging Gardens in Babylon during a MWR convoy in Iraq. That was cool. Met a lot of neat people. Traveled to different countries. I got to go to Germany, Italy, Greece, Spain, Iraq, Kuwait. Could never have done that.
That's right.
So
That's right.
that kind of stuff. Driving into a city that has just been bombed into oblivion is a sight that is, I mean, it sears into your mind, and suddenly you're in a World War II movie. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
this is crazy. So things that you can only experience in the military, which is stuff you'll take with you forever. That part's really, really interesting.
Well, Chris, the library appreciates you giving us your story.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you
I
for
appreciate your service.
Thanks, sir.